and material remains. The ancient Indians left innumerable material remains. The stone temples in South India and the brick monasteries in Eastern India still stand to remind us of the great building activi ties of the past. But the major part of these remains lies buried in the mounds scattered all over the Cone Tri. The mound is an elevated portion of land covering remains of old habitations. It may be of different types: single culture, major culture, and multiculture. Single culture mounds represent only one culture throughout. Some mounds represent only painted grey are PGW culture, other Satavahana culture, and still others Khan culture. In major culture mounds, one culture is dominant and the others are not so important. Multiculture mounds represent several important cultures in succession, which occasionally overlap with one another, like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. An excavated mound can be used for the understanding of successive layers in material and other aspects of culture. A mound can be excavated vertically or horizontally. Vertical excavation means lengthwise digging to cover the period-wise sequence of cultures. It is generally confined to a 1059. Historical construction. Part of the site. Horizontal excavation means digging the mound as a whole, or a major part of it. The method may enable the excavator to obtain a complete idea of the site culture in a particular period. Since most sites have been dug vertically, they provide a good chronological sequence of material culture. Horizontal diggings, being very expensive, are very few in number, with the result that excavations do not give us a full and even adequate picture of macro life in many phases of ancient Indian history. Even in those mounds which have been excavated, the ancient remains have been preserved in varying proportions. In the dry arid climate of western Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan and northwestern India, antiquities are found in a better state of preservation, but in the moist and humid climate of the middle Gangetic plains and in the deltaic regions, even iron implements suffer corrosion and mud. Structures become difficult to detect. It is only in the phase of burnt brick structures or stone structures that impressive and large-scale remains are found in moist and alluvial areas. Excavations have brought to light the cities which the people established around 2500 BC in northwestern 1059. 12. India. Similarly, they tell us about the material culture which was developed in the Gangetic plains. They show the layout of the settlements in which people lived, the types of pottery they used, the form of house in which they dwelt, the kind of cereals they used as food, and the type of tools and implements they handled. Some people in South India buried along with the dead their tools, weapons, pottery, and other belongings in the graves, which were encircled by big pieces of stone. These structures are called megaliths, although some megaliths do not fall in this category. By digging them, we have come to learn of the life which people lived in the Deccan from the Iron Age onwards. The science which enables us to dig the old mounds in a systematic manner, in successive layers, and to form an idea of the material life of the people is called archaeology. Material remains recovered as a result of excavation and exploration are subjected to various kinds of scientific examination. Their dates are fixed by following the method of radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon, or carbon-14, C14, is a radioactive isotope of carbon which is present in all living objects. It decays, like all radioactive substances, at a uniform rate. When an object is living, the process of the decay of C to the power of 1/4 is neutralized by absorption of C to the power of 1/4 through air and food. However, when an object ceases to be alive, its C14 content continues to decay at a uniform rate, but it ceases to absorb C to the power of 1 from air and food. By measuring the loss of C to the power of 1 content in an ancient object, its age can be determined. This is because, as stated, 11 o'clock earlier, the decay of C14 takes place at a uniform rate. It is known that the half-life of C14 is 5,568 years. The half-life of a radioactive material is defined as the period during which 1/2 of the radioactive content in an object disappears. Thus, C content in an object which ceased to live 5,568 years ago would be half of what it was when it was living, and in an object which ceased to live 11,136 years ago, its CH content would be 1/4 of what it was when it was living. The history of climate and vegeta. Tine is known through an examiner of plant residues, and especially through pollen analysis. Thus, on this basis, it is suggested that agriculture was practiced in Rajasthan and Kashmir around 1700 to 1600 BC. The nature and components of metal artifacts are analyzed scientifically, and as a result, the sources from where metals were obtained are located, and the stages in the development of metal technology are identified. An examination of animal bones shows whether the animals were domesticated, and also indicates the uses to which they were put. Coins. Although a good number of coins and inscriptions has been found on the surface, many of them have been unearthed by digging. The study D coins is called numismatics. Ncert Indian currency was not issued in the form of paper, as is being used these days, but as metal coins. Ncert coins were made of metal, copper, silver, gold, or lead. Coin molds made of burnt clay have been large numbers. Most of the balu discovered in 1101. Types of sources and historical co. To the Kushan period, to the first 3 Christian centuries. The use of such molds in the post-Gupta period almost disappeared. Since there was nothing like the modern banking system in ancient times, people kept money in earthenware and also in brass vessels, and maintained them as precious hoards on which they could fall back in time of need. Many of these hoards, containing not only Indian coins, but also those minted abroad such as in the Roman Empire, have been discovered in different parts of the country. They are preserved mostly in museums at Calcutta, Patna, Lucknow, Delhi, Jaipur, Mumbai and Chennai. Many Indian coins are found in the museums of Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Since Britain ruled over India for a long time, British officials succeeded in transferring many of the Indian coins to private and public collections in that country. Coins of the major dynasties have been catalogued and published. We have catalogues of coins in the Indian Museum at Calcutta, of Indian coins in the British Museum in London, and so on. But there is a large number of coins which have yet to be catalogued and published. Our earliest coins contain a few symbols, but the later coins mention the names of kings, gods, or dates. The areas where they are found indicate the region of their circulation. This has enabled us to reconstruct the history of several ruling dynasties, especially of the Indo-Greeks, who came to India from North Afghanistan and ruled here in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. since coins were used for various. 1101. Instruction. 13. Purposes such as donations, mode of payment, and medium of exchange. They throw considerable light on economic history. Some coins were issued by the guilds of merchants and goldsmiths with the permission of the rulers. This shows that crafts and commerce had become important. Coins helped transactions on a large scale and contributed to trade. We get the largest number of coins in post-Maurya times. These were made of lead, cotton, copper, bronze, silver, and gold. The Guptas issued the largest number of gold coins. All this indicates that trade and commerce flourished, especially in post-Maurya and a good part of Gupta times. But the fact that only a few coins belonging to post-Gupta times have been found indicates the decline of trade and commerce in that period. Coins also portray kings and gods, and contain religious symbols and legends, all of which throw light on the art and religion of the time. Inscriptions. Far more important than coins are inscriptions. Their study is called epigraphy, and the study of the old writing used in inscriptions and other old records is called paleography. Inscriptions were carved on seals, stone pillars, rocks, copper plates, temple walls, and bricks or images. In the country as a whole, the earliest inscriptions were recorded on stone. But in the early centuries of the Christian era, copper plates began to be used for this purpose. Even then, the practice of engraving inscriptions on stone continued in South India on a large scale. We have also in that 1102. 14. Region a large number of inscriptions recorded on the walls of the temples to serve as permanent records. Like coins, inscriptions are preserved in various museums of the country, but the largest number may be found in the office of the chief epigraphist at Mysore. The earliest inscriptions were written in the Prakrit language in the 3rd century BC. Sanskrit was adopted as an epigraphic medium in the 2nd century AD, and its use became widespread in the 4th and 5th centuries. Even then, Prakrit continued to be employed. Inscriptions began to be composed in regional languages in the 9th and 10th centuries. Most inscriptions bearing on the history of Maurya, post-Maurya, and Gupta times have been published in a series of collections called Corpus Inscriptionum Indicarum. But not too many inscriptions of post-Gupta times have been paired in such systematic compilations. In the case of South India, topographical lists of inscriptions have been brought out. Still there are more than 50,000 inscriptions, mostly of South India, which await publication. The Harappan inscriptions, which await decipherment, seem to have been written in a pictographic script in which ideas and objects were expressed in the form of pictures. Ashokan inscriptions were engraved in the Brahma script, which was written 10 from left to right. But some were Leo incised in the Koroshta script, which was written from right to left. However, the Brahma script prevailed in the whole country except for the northwestern Pate. Grok and Ara MAIC scripts were employed in writing. 1102. Ancient India. Ashokan inscriptions in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Brahma continued to be the main script till the end of Gupta times. An epigraphist can decipher most inscriptions of the country up to about the 7th century, if he has carefully learnt Brahmi and its variations. But afterwards we notice strong regional variations in this script, which is called by different names. The Kaliest inscriptions are found on the seals of Harappa, belonging to about 2500 BC. They have not been deciphered so far. The oldest inscriptions deciphered so far were issued by Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. In the 14th century AD, 2 Ashokan pillar inscriptions were found by Feroz Shah Tulak, one in Meerut and another at a place called Topra in Haryana. He brought them to Delhi and asked the Pandits of his empire to decipher the inscriptions, but they failed to do so. The same difficulty was faced by the British when in the last quarter of the 18th century they discovered Ashokan inscriptions. These epigraphs were first deciphered in 1837 by James Frincep, a civil servant in the employ of the East India Company in Bengal. We have various types of inscriptions. Some convey royal orders and decisions regarding social, religious and administrative matters to officials and people in general. Ashokan inscriptions belong to this category. Others are votive records of the followers of Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavaism, Shaivism, etc., who put up pillars, tablets, temples or images as marks of devotion. Still other types eulogize the attributes and achievements of kings and conquerors, and 1103. Types of sources and historical see. Never speak of their defeats or weaknesses. To this category belongs the Allahabad inscription of Samudragupta. Finally, we have many donative records, which refer specially to gifts of money, cattle, land, etc. Mainly for religious purposes, made not only by kings and princes, but also by artisans and merchants. Inscriptions recording land grants, made mainly by chiefs and princes, are very important for the study of the land system and administration in ancient India. These were mostly engraved on copper plates. They record the grants of lands, revenues and villages made to monks, priests, temples, monasteries, vassals and officials. They were written in all languages, such as Prakrit, Sanskrit, Tamil, Telugu. Iterary sources. Although is ancient whose no winning as Kali as 2500 BC, Kui Lucy Angsiang Morlaps are Huividi in the 4th century AD, and have been found in Central Asia. In India, they were written on birch bark and palm leaves, but in Central Asia, where the Prakrit language had spread from India, manuscripts were also written on sheep leather and wooden tablets. These writings are called inscriptions, but they are as good as manuscripts. When printing was not known, manuscripts were valued immensely. Although old Sanskrit manuscripts are found all over the country, they mostly belong to South India, Kashmir and Nepal. At present inscriptions are mostly preserved in museums, and manuscripts in libraries. Most ancient books contain 1103. Construction. 15. Religious themes. The religious literature of the Hindus includes the Vedas, the Ramayana, and the Malvubhuja, the Puranas, etc. They throw considerable light on the social and cultural conditions of ancient tunes, but it is difficult to make use of them in the context of time and place. The Rig Veda may be assigned to circa 1500 to 1000 BC, but the collections of the Atharva Veda, Yajurveda, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and the Upanishads belong roughly to 1500 BC. Almost every Vedic text contains interpolations, which generally appear at its beginning of end, but are not rare in its middle. The Rig Veda mainly contains prayers, while the later Vedic texts mainly comprise not only pravas, but also rituals, magic and mythological stunts. However, the Upanishads contain philosophical Speculations. It was to it. Vola tense, it was incrossary to lean the viewangers vims or Luke viewer these supplements of the Veda comprised phonetics shiksha, ritual kalpa, grammar, vyakarana, etymol, ogya, narukta, metrics chanda, and astronomy jyotisha. A good deal of literature grew around each one of these subjects. It was written in the form of precepts in prose. A precept was called sutra because of its brevity. The most famous example of this writing is the grammar of Panini writ 10 around 400 BC. While illustrat, the rules of grammar, Panini d throws invaluable light on the Sosai, Edikorami, and Ulchu of his times. The two epics, and the major Puranas seem to have been finally compiled by circa AD 400. Of the 1104. 16. Epics the Mahabharata attributed to Vyasa is older in age and possibly reflects the state of affairs from the 10th century BC to the 4th century AD originally. It consisted of 8,800 verses and was called Jaya, or the collection dealing with victory. These were raised to 24,000 and came to be known as Bharata because it contains the stories of the descent dance of one of the earliest Vedic tribes called Bharata. The final compilation brought the verses to 100,000, which came to be known as the Mahabharata or the Sadasahasra Samhita. It contains narrative, descriptive and didactic material. The main narrative, which relates to the Kaurava Pandava conflict, may belong to later Vedic times. The descriptive portion might be used for post-Vedic times, and the didactic portion generally for post-Maurya and Gupta times. Similarly, the Ramayana of Valmiki originally consisted of 6,000 verses, which were raised to 12,000 verses, and finally to 24,000. Although this epic appears to be more unified than the Mahabharata, it has also its didactic portions, which were added later. The Ramayana composition started in the 5th century BC. Since then it passed through as many as 5 stages, and the 5th stage seems to be as late as the 12th century AD. As a whole, the text seems to have been composed later than the Mahabharata. In post-Vedic times, we have a large corpus of ritual literature. Big public sacrifices meant for princes and men of substance belonging to the 3 high varnas are laid down in the Srata Sutras, which provide for several pompous royal coronation. 1104. A. Indal. Ceremonies. Similarly, domestic rituals connected with birth, naming, sacred thread investiture, marriage, funerals, etc., are laid down in the Grihi Sutras. Both the Srata Sutras and the Grihi Sutras belong to circa 600 to 300 BC. Mention may also be made of the Salva Sutras, which prescribe various kinds of measurements for the construction of sacrificial altars. They mark the beginnings of the study of geometry and mathematics. The religious books of the Jainas and the Buddhists refer to historical persons and incidents. The earliest Buddhist texts were written in the Pali language, which was spoken in Magadha or South Bihar. They were finally compiled in the 2nd century BC in Sri Lanka, but the canonical portions reflect the state of affairs in the age of the Buddha in India. They tell us not only about the life of the Buddha, but about some of his royal contemporaries who ruled over Magadha, North Bihar, and eastern Uttar Pradesh. The most important and interesting portion of the non-canonical literature is provided by the stories of the previous births of Gautama Buddha. It was believed that before he was finally born as Gautama, the Buddha passed through more than 550 births, in many cases in the form of animals. Each birth story is called a Jataka, which is a folk tale. These Jatakas throw invaluable light on social and economic conditions ranging from the 5th to the 2nd century BC. They also make incidental references to political events in the age of the Buddha. The Jaina texts were written in Prakrit and were finally compiled in 1105. Types of sources and historical see the 6th century AD in Vallabhi in Gujarat. They, however, contain many passages which help us to reconstruct the political history of eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar in the age of Mahavira. The Jaina texts refer repeatedly to trade and traders. We have also a large body of secular literature. To this class belong the law books called the Dharma Sutras and Smritis, which, together with their commentaries, are called Dharmashastras. The Dharma Sutras were compiled in 500 to 200 BC, and the principal Smritis were codified in the first 6 centuries of the Christian era. They lay down the duties for different varnas, as well as for kings and their officials. They provide the rules for marriages together with the laws AC according to which property is to be held, sold and inherited. They also prescribe punishments for persons guilty of theft, assault, murder, adultery, etc. An important law book is the Arthashastra of Kautilya. The text is divided into 15 books, of which books 2 and 3 may be regarded as of an earlier date. They seem to have been the work of different hands. This text was put in its final form in the beginning of the Christian era, but its earliest portions reflect the state of society and economy in the age of the Mauryas. It provides rich material for the study of ancient Indian polity and economy. We also possess the works of Basa, Sudraka, Kalidasa, and Banabhata. Apart from their literary value, they mirror the conditions of the times to which the writers belonged. The works of Kalidasa comprise kavyas and dramas, the most. 1105. Construction. 17. Famous of which 18 the Abhijnanashakuntalam. Besides being great creative compositions, they provide us with glimpses of the social and cultural life of northern and central India in the age of the Guptas. In addition to Sanskrit sources, we have some of the earliest Tamil texts found in the corpus of the Sangam literature. This was produced over a period of 3 to 4 centuries by poets who assembled in colleges patronized by chiefs and kings. Such colleges were called Sangam, and the literature produced in these assemblies is known as the Sangam Literatur. The compilation of the corpus is attributed to the first 4 Christian centuries, although final compilations may have been completed by the 6th century. The Sangam literature comprises about 30,000 lines of poetry, which are arranged in 8 anthologies called Atatakai. The poems are collected in groups of hundreds such as Puranuru, the 400 of the exterior, and others. There are 2 main groups, Padanenkel Kanaku, the 18 lower collections, and Padapatu, the 10 songs. The former is generally assumed to be older than the latter, and hence considered to be of much historical importance. The Sangam texts have several layers, but at present they cannot be established on the basis of style and content. As shown later, these layers can be detected on the basis of stages in social evolution. The Sangam texts are different from the Vedic texts, particularly the 1106. 18. Rig Vedic texts, they do not constitute religion's literature. The short and long poems were composed by Nama Oyu's poets in praise of numerous heroes and heroines. Thus they are secular in nature. They are not primitive songs, but they show a high quality of literature. Many poems mention a warrior, or a chief, or a king by name and describe his military exploits in detail. The gifts made by him to bards and warriors are celebrated. These poems may have been recited in the courts. They are compared with the Arwise poetry of the Homeric age, for they represent a heroic age of warriors and battles. It is difficult to use these texts for historical purposes. Perhaps the proper names, titles, dynasties, territories, wars, etc., mentioned in the poems are partly ear. Some cite Chera kings mentioned in the Sangam text. Texts also appear as donors in Ncert IP breeze of the first and the second Century AP. The Sangam texts refer to many settlements, including Kavrapatnam, whose flourishing existence is now attested archaeologically. They also speak of the Yavanas coming in their own vessels purchasing pepper with gold and supplying wine and women slaves to the natives. This trade is known not only from Latin and Greek writings, but also from the archaeological record. The Sangam literature is a very major source of our information for the social, economic, and political life of the people living in deltaic Tamil Nadu in the early Kris Echan centuries. What it says about trade and commerce is attested by VA foreign accounts and archaeological G finds. A P C Phi T A TH 1106. Foreign accounts. Indigenous literature can be supple. Meant by foreign accounts. To India came the Greek, Roman and Chinese visitors, either as traveller religious converts, and they left behind AC accounts of the things that they saw. It is remarkable that Alexander's Inver Sion finds no mention in Indian sources, and it is entirely on the basis of the Greek sources that we have to reconstruct the history of his Indian exploits. The Greek writers mention Chandrakotas, a contemporary of Alexander the Great who invaded India in 326 BC. Prince Chandrakotas is identified with Chandragupta Maurya, whose date of accession is fixed at 322 BC. This identification has served as the Sneet Anknoy in Mughal chronology. The Indica of Megasthenes, who to the court of Chandragupta Maurya, has been served only in fragments quoted by subsequent classical writers. These fragments, when read together, furnish valuable information not only about the system of Maurya administration, but also about social classes and economic activities in the Maurya period. The Indica is not free from credulity and exaggerations, which is true of many other ancient accounts. Greek and Roman accounts of the 1st and 2nd centuries, A.D. mention many Indian ports and enumerate 8 items of trade between India and the Roman Empire. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and Ptolemy's Geography, both written in Greek, provide valuable data for the study of ancient geography and commerce. The date ascribed to the first ranges between 1107 A. Types of sources and historical C. AD 80 and 115, while the second is attributed to about AD 150. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which was written by an anonymous writer, describes the Roman trade in the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean. Pliny's Naturalis Historia, which belongs to the 1st century AD, was written in Latin and tells us about trade between India and Italy. Of the Chinese travelers mentioned may be made of F. Xian and Huanzang. Both of them were Buddhists and came to this country to visit the Buddhist shrines and to study Buddhism. The first came in the beginning of the 5th century AD, and the second in the second quarter of the 7th century AD. F. Xian describes the social, religious, and economic conditions of India in the age of the Guptas, and Huanzang presents a similar account of India in the age of Harsha. Historical sense. Ancient Indians are charged with the lack of historical sense. It is obvious that they did not write history in the manner it is done now, nor did they write it in the way the Greeks did. We have a sort of history in the Puranas, which are 80 in number. 18 was a conventional term. Though encyclopedic in contents, the Puranas provide dynastic history up to the beginning of the Gupta rule. They mention the places where the events took place and sometimes discuss their causes and effects. Statements about events are made in future tense, although they were recorded much after the events had happened. The authors of the Puranas. E. T. E. 1107. Construction. 19. We're not unaware of the idea of change, which is the essence of his Tory. The Puranas speak of 4 ages called Kreta, Treta, Vipara, and Kalt. Each succeeding age is depicted as worse than the preceding one, and as one age slides into the other, moral values and social institutions suffer degeneration. The importance of time and place, vital elements in history, is indicated. It is said that Dharma becomes Adharma according to changes in time and place. Several eras, according to which events were recorded, were started in ancient India. The Vikrama Samvat began in 57 BC, the Shaka Samvat in AD 78, and the Gupta era in AD 319. Inscriptions record events in the context of time and place. During the 3rd century BC, Ashokan inscriptions show considerable historical sense. Ashoka ruled for 37 years. His inscriptions record events that happened from the 8th to the 27th regnal year. So far, events relating to only 9 regnal years appear in the inscriptions that have been discovered. Future discoveries may throw light on events relating to the remaining years of his reign. Similarly, in the 1st century BC, Caravella of Kalinga records a good many events of his life year-wise in the Hathigumpha inscription. Indians display considerable historical sense in biographical writings. A good example is the composition of the Harshakarita by Banabhata in the 7th century AD. It is a semi-biographical work written in ornate style, which became the despair of later imitators. It describes the early won career of Harshavardhana. Although full of exaggerations, it gives an 1108 20 excellent idea of the court life under Harsha and the social and religious life in his age. Later, several other karitas or biographies were written. Sandukara Nandi's Ramakarita, 12th century, narrates the story of conflict between the Kaivata peasants and the Pala prince Ramapala, resulting in the latter's victory. Bilhana's Vikramadika Devakarita recounts the achievements of his patron, Vikramaditya 6, 1076-1127, the Chalukya king of Kalyan. Even the biographies, Karita, of some merchants of Gujarat were written in the 12th-13th centuries AD. Samitla historical works may have been written in South India. But so far only one such account has been aired. This is called the Mushika Vamsha, which was written by Achula in the 11th century. It gives an account of the dynasty of the Mushikas, which ruled in northern Korea. But the best example of the earliest historical writing is provided by the Rajataranjani, or the Stream of Kings written by Kalhana. In the 12th century, it is a string of biographies of the kings of Kashmir, and can be considered to be the first work which possesses several traits of his story, as it is understood in our times. Constructing history. So far numerous sites, both one prehistorical and historical, have been excavated and explored, but the tea salts do not find a place in the main E stream of ancient Indian history. End stages of social evolution in India cannot be comprehended without taking into account the results of prehistoric archaeology. Historical E. 1108. Archaeology is equally important. Though more than 150 sites belong to have the ancient historical period been excavated, yet their advance to the study of social, economic, and cultural trends in ancient times has not been discussed in the survey books. This needs to be done, particularly in the context of the urban history of ancient India. So far the importance of mostly Buddhist and some Brahmanical sites has been highlighted, but religious history needs to be seen in relation to social and economical developments. Ancient history has been constructed so far mainly on the basis of literary sources, foreign and indigenous. Coins and inscriptions play some part, but the texts receive more weightage. Now new methods deserve attention. We have to establish correlation between the Vedic age on the one hand and the painted grey ware and other types of archaeological finds on the other. Similarly, early Pali texts have to be related to the northern black polished ware (NBPW) archaeology. Further, the information derived from the Sangam texts needs to be tied up with that inferred from inscriptions and early megalithic archaeology in peninsular India. Archaeological evidence should be considered far more important than long family trees given in the Puranas. The Puranic tradition could be used to date Rama of Ayodhya around 2000 BC, but diggings and extensive explorations in Ayodhya do not show any settlement around that date. Similarly, although Krishna plays an important part in the Mahabharata, the earliest inscriptions and sculptural 1109 types of sources and historical pieces found in Mathura between 200 BC and AD 300 do not attest his presence. Because of such difficulties, the ideas of an epic age based on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata has to be discarded, although in the past it formed a chapter in most survey books on ancient India. Of course, several stages of social evolution in both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata can be detected. This is so because the epics do not belong to a single phase of social evolution, they have undergone several additions, as has been shown earlier in the present chapter. Many inscriptions are dismissed so far on the ground that they possess little historical value. Historical value is taken to mean information needed for reconstructing political history. Compared to Puranic Traditions, inscriptions are certainly more reliable. Thus the former are used to push back the origin of the Satavahanas, which is placed in the 1st century BC on the epigraphic basis. Inscriptions may indicate the reign period of a king, his conquest and its extent, but they also show trends in the development of polity, society, economy and religion. The present book, therefore, does not use inscriptions merely for political or religious history. Epigraphic land grants are valued not for the family trees and lists of conquest, but more. 1109. Construction. 21. Importantly for the rise of new states and changes in social and agrarian structure, particularly in post-Gupta times. Similarly, coins need to be used not only for the reconstruction of the history of the Indo-Greeks, Shakas, Satavahanas and Kushans, but also to illuminate the history of trade and urban life. In sum, careful collection of the material derived from texts, coins, inscriptions, archaeology, etc., is essential for historical construction. We have seen that this raises the problem of the relative importance of the sources. Thus, coins, inscriptions and archaeology are considered more important than mythologies found in the epics and Puranas. Mythologies may support dominant norms, validate social mores and justify the privileges and disabilities of people organized in castes and other social groups, but the events described in them cannot be taken as true. Past practices can also be explained with the help of some ancient survivals in our own times, or with the insights derived from the study of primitive people. A sound historical reconstruction cannot ignore developments in other ancient societies. A comparative view may remove the obsession with the idea of the rare or unique in ancient India and may bring out those trends which ancient India Shares with the past societies of the other countries.